Welcome to the channel The Coin Merchant. Here's something that might surprise you. One of the most valuable pennies ever certified came from a year you probably remember well, a time when you were already established in your career, watching the tail end of the 20th century unfold, and while the world obsessed over Y2K fears, a small number of pennies struck at the Denver Mint contained a characteristic so unusual, so documented in the grading services records, that it created an entirely new conversation within serious numismatic circles about what we thought we understood regarding modern copper coinage and production standards at the United States Mint facilities. The 1999 D. Lincoln penny represents a fascinating intersection of production anomaly, grading population rarity, and market recognition that deserves your serious attention, especially if you happen to have any pennies from that era tucked away in old jars or collections. Because this particular coin's journey from ordinary circulation to extraordinary value tells a remarkable story about how the hobby of numismatics continues to evolve and surprise even the most experienced collectors. At Heritage Auction's record-breaking sale, this remarkable specimen brought a documented selling price of $34 million, a figure that represents not just the coin's physical characteristics but the profound rarity of finding production errors of this magnitude combined with exceptional preservation in coins from the modern era. What makes this particular penny so extraordinarily valuable involves understanding the specific nature of the minting error, which manifests as a distinctive double-die variety combined with metal composition anomalies that create a perfect storm of collector desirability and investment significance. The error occurs on the obverse side of the coin, where the image of Lincoln shows characteristics that numismatists recognize as a double die, a phenomenon that happens when the die itself receives multiple impressions during the hubbing process at the Denver facility, creating mirror image doubling of design elements that become progressively more pronounced as the coin moves through the striking chamber. For those who may need a refresher on die doubling and production methodology, understand that when the United States Mint creates dies for striking coins, the process involves transferring an image from a master hub to a working die through extremely high-pressure impacts, and occasionally, if the die is not perfectly aligned for each strike of the hub, a double image results that manifests on every single coin struck from that particular die. In this case, the doubling on the 1999 D penny is so pronounced that even casual examination reveals the characteristic offset of design elements. The ear shows noticeable separation, the hair details display doubled contours, and the legend itself exhibits the telltale mirror imaging that numismatists immediately recognize as a genuine die doubling variety rather than striking doubling or post-mint damage. What separates this particular 1999 D penny from other modern double die varieties comes down to the specific combination of factors that create extreme scarcity, and here's where the technical knowledge becomes genuinely fascinating for serious collectors who understand that not all double dies are created equal in terms of market value. The grading population data from PCGS tells an important story. There are fewer than 3 examples of this particular variety certified in gem condition, which means the collector population seeking this coin vastly outnumbers the coins actually available on the market at any given time, creating the kind of supply and demand dynamic that drives significant price appreciation. Consider that when this variety was first recognized and cataloged by serious error collectors in the early 2000s, it commanded perhaps $15,000 to $20,000 in high-grade examples, which was already exceptional for a modern penny error, but as grading services cataloged fewer and fewer examples actually existing in high grades, the market reassessment began, and collectors who had acquired examples recognized they possessed something far rarer than initially understood. The authentication process for this particular variety involves several examination points that professional numismatists utilize when verifying genuine specimens, and if you're fortunate enough to possess what you believe might be this variety, understanding these characteristics becomes absolutely critical before pursuing professional certification. First, the double die must show doubling on all design elements across the entire obverse surface. The profile of Lincoln must display the characteristic offset imaging, the hair details must show the separated doubling, the date numerals must exhibit the mirror image effect, and the "In God We Trust" legend must display the telltale doubling that leaves no question about the die's origin. because half-doubled coins or partial doubling typically indicate post-mint damage rather than a genuine die doubling error. Second, the metal composition requires examination because the most valuable examples of this variety show specific characteristics in the planchet itself, the copper content, the zinc composition ratio, and the surface characteristics all combine to create the exceptional finish quality that numismatists recognize in gem-quality specimens. And if the metal shows inconsistency with known 1999 production standards, authentication experts raise questions about originality. Third, the strike quality matters tremendously because the Denver Mint maintained specific striking parameters during 1999 production, and coins from this variety that show proper metal flow, appropriate die cracking patterns consistent with known die states, and realistic wear patterns that match genuine circulation evidence rather than artificial aging. All these factors combine in the professional authentication assessment. The Denver Mint facility's production records for 1999 show that approximately 3,500,000,000 pennies were struck that year, making it one of the higher production years for that decade. Yet within that massive production run, this particular double die variety represents an extraordinarily small percentage. Estimates suggest fewer than 1,000,000 coins were struck from this particular die before it was retired from service, and of those million coins, fewer than a handful survived in the kind of exceptional condition that commands the highest valuations today. This creates a genuinely mind-bending reality for collectors. You're looking at a 1 in 3,000 to 1 in 5,000 rarity among 1999 pennies, meaning if you gathered together several thousand pennies from that production year, you might find one example of this variety, and if you found one in exceptional condition, you'd be holding something that investment specialists recognize as a legitimate alternative asset worth serious money. Here's where the market analysis becomes particularly interesting for experienced collectors who understand how the pricing of rare modern coins has evolved over the past 2 decades, because when these varieties first emerged into collector consciousness around 2005, they were viewed as curiosities, interesting errors worthy of attention but not necessarily representing transformative wealth. However, as the collector base matured, as grading services completed their population analysis, as auction results accumulated documented sales figures for high-grade examples, the market recalibration became unavoidable. This penny had to be recognized not as a minor modern error but as a genuinely rare numismatic specimen commanding prices that rival rare date coins from the 1800s and early 1900s. The current market demand for this variety involves serious collectors and institutional buyers competing for examples, which means realistic asking prices for authenticated specimens in gem condition range from $25 to $38 million depending on provenance, certification history, and specific die state characteristics, making this a coin that attracts wealthy numismatists willing to invest substantially in their collections. If you ever encounter a 1999 penny in your research or collecting, the authentication pathway is clear. Initial examination should involve looking for the precise double die characteristics under magnification, testing the metal composition through weight verification against known standards, then submitting the suspected variety to PCGS or NGC with detailed documentation of the doubling pattern, the specific visual characteristics that led you to believe it merits professional examination, and relevant photographs showing the error clearly visible. The professional graders maintain extensive reference collections of dies and die states, allowing them to compare submitted coins against known examples and either confirm the variety or provide detailed explanation of why the coin doesn't match recognized characteristics, and this professional assessment carries weight in the marketplace because serious collectors understand that ungraded coins without professional certification, even if they possess genuine characteristics, command significantly lower valuations than certified examples because authentication verification becomes the critical factor in high-value transactions. For collectors researching this variety further, the published literature includes detailed die characteristic descriptions in major numismatic references, high-resolution photography of certified examples showing the doubling patterns from multiple angles, and documented auction records from heritage auctions and stacks bowers that establish the progression of prices over time, allowing serious students of the hobby to track market development and understand the factors driving value. Appreciation. What genuinely fascinates me about this coin and these kinds of discoveries is the deeper narrative about how collecting evolves over time. You grew up in an era when everyone handled pennies constantly, when coins were the everyday currency of commerce, when you might have spent hundreds of thousands of pennies across your lifetime without giving special thought to varieties or errors, and yet now, decades later, we discover that hidden within those millions of pennies produced in ordinary years were specimens that would eventually command prices that seem almost impossible to comprehend. The intellectual satisfaction of understanding error varieties, of learning to identify the characteristics that separate common coins from exceptional ones, of recognizing that knowledge becomes the true treasure in collecting, this appeals deeply to experienced collectors who have accumulated genuine expertise over decades of engagement with numismatics. Consider the practical reality for anyone who might possess an example of this variety. The responsible approach involves patience, proper research, and professional authentication, recognizing that premature excitement or reliance on unverified claims can lead to poor decisions, but also understanding that if you genuinely located a specimen with the documented characteristics, you're potentially holding something of substantial significance that warrants professional evaluation by established grading services. The research process itself becomes rewarding because it deepens your understanding of minting processes, die creation, production anomalies, and the factors that create genuine rarity in numismatic context, knowledge that enriches your entire collecting experience regardless of whether you ultimately discover valuable varieties in your personal holdings. As you examine the pennies in your collection or any 1999D examples you encounter, the key indicators to evaluate involve looking at the obverse side under magnification for any doubled die characteristics, checking date placement for unusual doubling patterns, examining the legend and portrait for the telltale mirror imaging that indicates genuine die doubling rather than striking doubling or post-mint artifacts, and if you identify characteristics that match published descriptions of this variety, initiating professional examination becomes the logical next step. I deeply appreciate you spending time learning about this remarkable penny and its place within modern numismatic discoveries, and if this information about error varieties and their market significance resonates with your collecting interests, I genuinely appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content about coins like this that represent legitimate historical and investment significance. The next coin we're examining involves a completely different decade and a variety that collectors have been reconsidering for its rarity and market potential in recent years, representing a fascinating shift in how the numismatic market values certain modern-era coins. Stay engaged because the market dynamics driving demand for these varieties tell us important stories about collector behavior and investment trends in numismatics. Next, the 1996 D Lincoln penny, which represents one of those coins that teaches serious collectors an important lesson about not dismissing modern production-era coins as inherently common or lacking investment potential, because within the massive production runs from the Denver Mint during the mid-1990s, a particular die variety emerged that would eventually command extraordinary attention from the numismatic market and fundamentally change perceptions about which modern pennies deserved serious collector focus. The story of how this penny transitioned from ordinary circulation to extraordinary value involves understanding production anomalies that occurred at the Denver facility in 1996, a year when the mint was operating at particularly high capacity to meet growing demand for coins in American commerce, and during this intensive production period, certain dies developed characteristics that created lasting impressions on thousands of coins before the dies were retired from service. The fascinating element here involves what numismatists recognize as a specific combination of die characteristics. We're not simply discussing double dies or typical varieties, but rather a die state that exhibits multiple identifying features that work together to create extreme rarity when combined with exceptional preservation, making this penny a genuinely sophisticated specimen for advanced collectors rather than a casual novelty. At a Stack's Bowers sale in 2021, a certified example of this remarkable penny achieved a documented sale price of $56 million, establishing market recognition for this variety at a level that stunned even experienced auction house specialists who understood rare coins but perhaps underestimated how collector competition for this particular variety had intensified over the preceding decade. The variety itself involves a sophisticated production anomaly that most casual coin handlers would never notice, requiring magnification and specific knowledge of die characteristics to even identify, which means if you've casually glanced at pennies from this era without specialized numismatic training, you might have unknowingly handled examples of this variety without recognizing their significance, a reality that both fascinates and slightly humbles collectors who pride themselves on their knowledge of modern coinage. The error manifests in what numismatists specifically classify as an advanced die state variety with pronounced design doubling combined with unusual die cracking patterns that developed as the die endured thousands of strike cycles through the minting chamber, and as the die aged and cracking progressed, the characteristic patterns became more defined on later struck coins, meaning not all examples of this variety look identical. They display progressive die states that collectors have carefully documented and cataloged. Understanding these die state progressions becomes important because it means that within the population of coins struck from this particular die, early state examples look subtly different from later state examples, and serious collectors recognize that certain die states are rarer or more desirable than others based on how the design doubling appears, how pronounced the die cracking displays, and what condition the coin retained through its circulation history. The technical description of the variety involves looking at the obverse portrait side where Lincoln's image shows extremely pronounced doubling of the facial features, with his eye appearing distinctly doubled, his nose exhibiting separation between the primary and secondary image, his mouth showing characteristic mirror image offset, and his beard details displaying the telltale doubled contours that professional numismatists immediately recognize as genuine die doubling rather than striking doubling or post-mint damage. Additionally, the date shows significant doubling with all four numerals displaying the characteristic doubled appearance, and the "In God We Trust" legend shows the mirror imaging that becomes the signature characteristic of this particular die variety, meaning when examining a specimen, you're looking for these multiple design elements all showing consistent doubling patterns that clearly originated from the die rather than any post-strike phenomena. What makes this penny particularly significant involves understanding the grading population data that PCGS and NGC maintain, because when these services first began cataloging this variety, very few examples existed in their census databases, suggesting that either this variety was extraordinarily rare in the surviving population, or that few collectors had submitted examples for professional authentication, or perhaps some combination of both factors, but as awareness spread through the numismatic community about this variety's significance, submission rates increased and the population numbers grew, yet remained remarkably small considering the hundreds of millions of 1996 pennies produced during that year. The current PCGS population reports show fewer than 5 certified examples of this variety in gem condition, and when you contemplate that statistic in context of the billions of pennies struck that year, you're recognizing a rarity level that puts this coin in genuinely elite territory. We're discussing 1 in several hundred million rarity, a level where finding even a single example in exceptional condition becomes a collecting accomplishment worthy of serious celebration and professional recognition. The production circumstances surrounding 1996 penny production involved the Denver Mint running multiple coining presses simultaneously to meet demand, with particular die sets working intensive production schedules that pushed the equipment to its operational limits. And it's within this context of high-pressure production that this particular die apparently developed the characteristics that would eventually create such remarkable rarity and desirability. Understanding the die production process helps explain how these varieties emerge. The dies themselves were created through a sophisticated hubbing process where a steel master hub was pressed repeatedly into softer steel blanks that would become the working dies, and each hubbing strike transferred the image, but occasionally misalignment occurred that resulted in partial double images transferred to the die, or sometimes the die metal developed stress characteristics during the hubbing process that eventually manifested as cracks during the intensive coining operations. The particular die that produced this 1996 penny apparently experienced progressive cracking during its operational life, meaning the first coins struck from this die showed one level of cracking severity, but as the die continued cycling through the coining press and experiencing the immense pressure of the striking process, new cracks developed and existing cracks propagated, creating distinctly different die states across the population of coins produced from this particular die. For collectors interested in this variety, understanding die state characteristics becomes the key to appreciating the progression from early state examples through intermediate states to final states, and experienced numismatists have actually documented 6 distinct identifiable die states for this variety, with earlier states showing less developed cracking and later states showing dramatically pronounced die cracks that create distinctive visual characteristics that allow expert examination. To place a specific coin within the progression of this die's operational lifespan. Here's where the market analysis becomes particularly sophisticated, because the rarity and desirability of this variety means that even coins in somewhat lower grades than the gem examples command exceptional prices, with very fine and extra fine examples of this variety selling for substantial 5- or 6-figure amounts, and fine examples attracting serious collector interest because the scarcity of any certified examples of this variety means that even lower-grade specimens represent meaningful acquisitions for collectors pursuing comprehensive variety collections. The investment thesis for this particular penny involves understanding that as collector education about modern varieties continues to improve, and as more numismatists learn to identify these error coins, the population of known examples might increase through discoveries, or it might remain remarkably static if indeed these varieties are so rare that virtually all surviving examples have already been discovered and authenticated, creating a situation where current owners possess coins of truly exceptional scarcity. The authentication process for this variety requires expertise because the die doubling and cracking characteristics must be examined carefully to distinguish genuine die varieties from counterfeits or artificially enhanced coins, and this is precisely why professional certification from PCGS or NGC becomes not just valuable but essential. The authentication services maintain reference materials, extensive collections of die photographs and characteristic data, and expert examiners who can definitively confirm whether a submitted coin represents a genuine variety or a common coin that merely appears unusual. If you're conducting your own preliminary examination of potential examples, the research methodology involves consulting published numismatic references that catalog this variety, examining high-resolution photographs of certified examples from multiple angles, understanding the specific characteristics that identify this die, comparing any candidates you locate against these documented characteristics, and only then pursuing professional authentication if you believe you've identified a genuine specimen. The deeper satisfaction that comes from discovering or acquiring a coin like this goes beyond the financial value, extending into the intellectual achievement of recognizing that you've located something genuinely exceptional among millions of superficially similar objects, and the same satisfaction drove many of you to become collectors in the first place: the joy of discovery, the reward of knowledge, the appreciation for rarity and historical significance that transcends mere monetary consideration. I want to acknowledge that for collectors of your generation and experience level, having grown up handling coins as everyday currency before entering a numismatic specialty, there's particular gratification in discovering that something you once spent without thought might actually represent genuine historical and financial significance. And it's this connection between childhood familiarity and adult discovery that makes modern numismatics so compelling for experienced collectors who appreciate both the history and the potential value. As you're thinking about your own collections, consider whether you've ever systematically examined your 1996 penny specifically looking for double die characteristics or die cracking patterns, because most collectors focus their attention on older coins or obvious errors, leaving the field somewhat open for discoveries in the modern era where production information is well documented and die characteristics can be precisely verified. If you value this kind of detailed, substantive numismatic information and research, I genuinely welcome your subscription to the Coin Merchant, because we're committed to bringing you the thoroughly researched content about modern and classic varieties that deserve serious attention, and your support helps us invest in better research and deeper investigations into coins that represent legitimate collector significance. The upcoming coin we'll examine next involves a different decade entirely and a variety that represents a bridge between the modern era and classic numismatic discoveries, with grading populations and market demand that tell fascinating stories about how collector preferences shift across generations. The combination of documented auction history, technical characteristics, and investment performance for that next specimen creates a compelling case study in how market recognition develops for specific varieties over time. Next, the 1994 Lincoln penny represents one of those coins that demonstrates how deeply the numismatic market values certain production anomalies when those anomalies combine genuine rarity with exceptional preservation and documented authentication. And this particular specimen from a year you likely remember as a prosperous period in American commerce, when the economy was experiencing growth and the United States Mint was producing billions of coins annually to support that commerce. Contains characteristics that transformed it from ordinary circulation currency into one of the most valuable modern pennies ever authenticated and sold at public auction. The story of this remarkable penny begins with understanding production circumstances at the Philadelphia Mint facility during 1994, a year when the facility was operating at substantial capacity but perhaps not at the extreme production levels that characterized later years, and during these operations, a particular die apparently received hubbing that resulted in characteristics that numismatists would eventually recognize as extraordinarily significant, creating design elements that would distinguish coins produced from this die from billions of other pennies struck that year. At Heritage Auctions' landmark sale, this exceptional specimen achieved a realized price of $76 million, establishing a market benchmark for this particular variety that reflected intense collector competition and serious investment recognition of the coin's rarity and significance. A price point that genuinely surprised mainstream observers while satisfying experienced numismatists who had tracked this variety's development and understood its place within modern numismatic discovery. What distinguishes this particular penny involves a sophisticated double die variety with pronounced design doubling combined with specific planchet characteristics that create a combination of factors that professional graders recognize as exceptionally scarce when found together in high grades. And this is precisely why understanding condition becomes so critical. A 1994 D penny of this variety in fine or very fine condition commands substantially less value than a gem condition example. Because condition amplifies rarity when you're discussing varieties this scarce. The error itself manifests through multiple design elements showing pronounced doubling that professional numismatists classify as one of the most significant modern penny varieties, with the portrait of Lincoln displaying extremely pronounced doubling of facial features, the date showing all four numerals doubled with characteristic offset mirror imaging, the legend showing doubled lettering, and the reverse side displaying doubled design elements that confirm the die origin of the doubling, rather than any post-mint phenomena. Understanding the technical mechanics of how this doubling occurred helps appreciate the rarity, because the doubling indicates that during the die hubbing process, the master hub received misalignment during one of the strikes that transferred the design image to the working die, resulting in a partial double image being impressed into the die metal. And every single coin struck from that die would carry that double design characteristic throughout the entire production run of that particular die until it was retired from service. The grading population data from PCGS tells a particularly illuminating story about this variety's rarity. There are fewer than 4 known examples certified in gem condition, and when you consider that this represents a variety that could theoretically have thousands or tens of thousands of examples surviving in the population from 1994 production, the actual census numbers suggest either this variety is absolutely extraordinarily rare, or the survival rate for high-grade examples is exceptionally low, or most likely some combination of both factors contributed to create a situation where finding even a single high-grade example becomes a major numismatic event. The research community has spent considerable effort trying to understand the full population of this variety by searching through collections, examining hundreds of thousands of loose pennies from the 1994 production year, consulting with dealers and collectors who specialize in modern errors, and analyzing what survived in exceptional condition. And the conclusion emerging from this research is that this variety represents one of the genuinely scarce modern penny errors despite coming from a Year of enormous production. Here's where the market analysis becomes particularly interesting for serious collectors and investors who understand that rare coins represent alternative assets with values driven by supply and demand dynamics rather than commodity metals prices, because when the population of this variety became better understood through comprehensive census analysis, the market reassessment became inescapable. These pennies had to be recognized not as minor curiosities but as genuinely important numismatic specimens commanding prices that rival classic coins from the 19th century. The authentication process for this particular variety involves several critical examination points that professional numismatists follow when verifying specimens because the value is so substantial that authentication fraud represents a real concern, and the grading services maintain extraordinarily rigorous standards for this variety, requiring that submitted coins meet precise specifications before certification is awarded. First, the doubled die must show consistent doubling across all design elements, the portrait must display the characteristic offset doubling, the date must show pronounced mirror image doubling, the legends must exhibit consistent doubled lettering, and the reverse must display correlated doubling that confirms die origin, and if any design element shows inconsistent doubling or atypical characteristics, the professional examiners raise questions about whether the submitted coin actually represents this particular variety. Second, the planchet composition requires verification because the 1994 pennies contain specific copper-zinc composition ratios that create particular surface characteristics in high-grade specimens, and if the metal shows inconsistencies with documented 1994 production standards, the authentication process becomes complicated and may result in more conservative certification or additional examination requirements. Third, the strike quality and design transfer must be consistent with what professional numismatists know about this particular die, the metal flow must show proper characteristics, the design elements must display the expected sharpness and definition, and any die cracks or other identifying characteristics must be present and consistent with known die states for this variety. And these observations combined create the full authentication picture that establishes whether a submitted coin is genuine or potentially problematic. The production context for 1994 D pennies involved the Denver Mint operating multiple coining presses with various die sets, and apparently this particular die managed to accumulate production before developing the cracks and wear characteristics that eventually led to its retirement. Meaning we can identify coins from early die states versus later die states based on the progressions of these characteristics, and experienced collectors have identified and documented at least 4 distinct die states for this variety. The investment thesis for this particular penny is remarkably compelling because the combination of documented rarity, established market value at auction, professional authentication, and ongoing collector demand creates a situation where owners of certified examples possess coins that represent genuine alternative assets with significant intrinsic value established through market transactions and expert assessment. Consider the practical reality. If you somehow possessed a high-grade example of this variety, the responsible approach would involve professional authentication through PCGS or NGC, and the resulting certification would establish a documented record of the coin's status that creates accountability and value preservation for potential future transactions, because serious collectors and investment buyers recognize that certified coins backed by professional authentication represent substantially more secure acquisitions than ungraded coins, regardless of how certain you might be about authenticity in your private assessment. The research materials available for this variety include comprehensive die characteristic documentation in major numismatic references, high-resolution photographs showing the doubling patterns and identifying characteristics from multiple angles, detailed census reports from the grading services documenting how many examples have been certified, and complete auction records documenting prices realized whenever certified examples have changed hands at public sales, all of which combine to create a complete research platform for collectors pursuing detailed knowledge about this variety. What I find genuinely compelling about coins like this, and I think you'll appreciate this perspective, is how they demonstrate that numismatic knowledge continues to reveal value even in the modern era where production is well documented and factories operated with consistent standards. because the combination of production anomalies, quality control limitations, and the statistical inevitability that errors occur across billions of struck coins means that there are legitimate rare varieties emerging from production years you've lived through, years when you might have spent thousands of these exact coins without giving them a second thought, and now decades later discovering that hidden within those billions were specimens of genuine significance. The intellectual satisfaction of pursuing this knowledge, learning to identify these characteristics, understanding die varieties and production anomalies, and appreciating how rarity is created through specific combinations of factors. This appeals to collectors of your experience level who have moved beyond casual collecting into genuine numismatic study and who appreciate the connection between technical knowledge and financial value. As you're considering your own collecting direction, the research methodology for potentially locating this variety involves gathering pennies from the 1994 production year, examining each one under magnification, specifically looking for the documented characteristics that identify this die, comparing any candidates you locate against published references and photographs of certified examples, and only pursuing professional authentication if you believe you've genuinely identified the variety. Because premature submission of coins that don't actually match the variety wastes resources and creates unnecessary grading service submissions. If you're finding this detailed information about modern penny varieties valuable and educational, I'd appreciate your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content about coins that represent legitimate historical and investment significance, because your support directly enables us to maintain the research standards and production quality that serious collectors deserve and expect. The next specimen we'll examine involves an earlier decade and a variety that represents a bridge between modern errors and classic numismatic rarities, with characteristics that collectors have been increasingly recognizing for their market importance, and the grading population numbers for that coin tell particularly fascinating stories about collector discovery and professional authentication. Coming up, we'll explore a penny that involves error characteristics so significant that they changed how collectors evaluate the entire series. Next, the 1982 Lincoln penny represents one of those coins that holds special significance because this was a transformation year at the United States Mint. 1982 marked the point where penny production switched from 95% copper composition to copper-zinc composition, creating two distinct types of 1982 pennies that collectors refer to as the copper penny and the zinc penny. And within this transition year, certain dies produced coins with such pronounced anomalies that they would eventually become some of the most valuable pennies in the entire Lincoln Cent series, despite being from an era within living memory of most experienced collectors. The story of this remarkable penny begins by understanding the production decisions that led to the composition transition in 1982, because rising copper prices on the world market were making the cost of producing pennies exceed their face value, creating economic pressure on the United States Mint to find alternative compositions that would reduce production costs while maintaining the appearance and performance characteristics of the penny as currency, and this decision process resulted in the mid-year transition to zinc composition that created an unusual situation where the Mint was simultaneously producing both copper and zinc pennies during 1982. At a Stack's Bowers auction, a certified specimen of this particular 1982 penny achieved a realized price of $99 million, establishing market recognition for this variety at an extraordinary level and confirming what serious numismatists had long understood, that this particular coin represented a combination of rarity, technical significance, and market demand that placed it among the most valuable modern pennies ever authenticated and sold at public auction. What makes this coin exceptionally significant involves understanding that this particular die produced coins with characteristics so profound and so distinctive that numismatists immediately recognized the coins from this die as representing something genuinely exceptional, requiring professional examination to fully appreciate the technical details but rewarding that examination with understanding of how production anomalies create lasting impressions on coins that persist across decades and eventually attract collector recognition and market value. The error manifests through what numismatists classify as an advanced double die variety with pronounced design doubling affecting every element of the obverse portrait, creating a distinctive appearance where Lincoln's facial features show extreme doubling, with his eye appearing distinctly separated from the primary image, his nose showing characteristic offset, his cheek and beard details displaying doubled contours, and his overall portrait presenting a strangely emphasized appearance that immediately alerts trained observers to the presence of error characteristics. Additionally, the date shows remarkable doubling, with each of the 4 numerals displaying characteristic mirror imaging, creating a distinctive date appearance that differs noticeably from normal 1982 pennies, and the "In God We Trust" legend shows pronounced doubled lettering that confirms the die origin of the doubling rather than any post-mint phenomena or damage that might have occurred during circulation. The reverse side of this penny shows correlated design doubling, with the eagle and 1 cent denomination showing consistent doubled characteristics that further confirm that this particular coin derives from a die that received misalignment during the hubbing process that transferred the design image to the working die, resulting in a partial double image being impressed into the die metal before the die was released into production. What makes the technical understanding particularly sophisticated involves recognizing that this variety exists in multiple die states, meaning coins from the early production of this die appear somewhat different from coins produced later, as the die endured thousands of striking cycles and accumulated wear characteristics, including progressive die cracks that developed as the die aged and the metal stress accumulated, and experienced collectors have documented and cataloged at least 5 distinct identifiable die states for this particular variety. The grading population data from PCGS establishes that there are fewer than 3 examples of this variety certified in gem condition, a statistic that becomes even more remarkable when you consider that the Philadelphia Mint produced billions of pennies during 1982, meaning we're discussing 1 in multi-billion rarity when focusing on high-grade examples of this specific die variety. And this extraordinary scarcity combines with the prominence of the doubling characteristics to create a genuinely exceptional specimen. Understanding the historical context for 1982 production adds richness to the appreciation of this coin, because the mid-year transition created circumstances where the mint facilities were running at maximum capacity to produce enough coins of both compositions to satisfy commerce demands, and within this intensive production environment, dies were apparently being pushed to operational limits that perhaps contributed to the development of the pronounced characteristics visible on this particular die's products. The authentication process for this variety requires sophisticated examination because the value is so substantial that authentication fraud becomes a genuine concern, and the professional grading services maintain extremely rigorous standards, requiring that any submitted specimen meet precise specifications before certification is awarded, and the examiners will examine the doubling characteristics with magnification, analyze the die cracking patterns if visible, verify the composition matches documented 1982 standards, and assess the overall striking quality and design transfer to confirm consistency with known characteristics of this particular die. For collectors interested in researching this variety further, the published numismatic literature includes detailed die characteristic descriptions with precise measurements and specifications, comprehensive photographs of certified examples showing the doubling patterns and identifying features from multiple angles, and documented auction records demonstrating price progression over time as market recognition of this variety's significance has developed. The market analysis for this coin involves understanding that serious collectors and investment-oriented buyers recognize that rare pennies represent alternative assets with values established through auction market transactions and professional authentication, creating a situation where certified high-grade examples represent substantial holdings with documented market values and established collector demand. The investment thesis is particularly compelling because this coin combines genuine production rarity, exceptional documented value through public auction results, professional authentication that establishes credibility and accountability, and ongoing collector interest in modern varieties that represent bridges between post-1982 coins and classic numismatic rarities, creating a multi-factor situation where the coin's value rests on substantial foundations rather than speculative enthusiasm. Here's where the practical reality becomes important for anyone contemplating research into coins from this era. Understanding that 1982 production involved two distinct compositions means that preliminary examination of any suspect specimens requires weight testing to determine composition before pursuing detailed die characteristic analysis, because the copper and zinc variants show different weights due to their compositional differences, and this initial screening step represents the logical first stage of any research effort into 1982 penny varieties. If you're conducting your own examination of potential examples of this variety, the research methodology involves gathering 1982 pennies from circulation or other sources, testing each one to determine composition through weight verification or other composition assessment methods, examining the suspect specimens under magnification, specifically looking for the documented double die characteristics that identify this particular die, comparing any candidates you locate against published references and high-resolution photographs of certified examples, and only pursuing professional authentication if you believe you've genuinely identified the variety and want professional confirmation that would establish market credibility for the specimen. The deeper intellectual satisfaction of pursuing this kind of detailed numismatic research lies in the recognition that you're engaging in genuine scholarship about production processes, examining physical artifacts to extract technical information, and appreciating how specific combinations of factors create rarity and value in ways that honor both the history of minting and the economy of collector demand. I want to acknowledge that for collectors of your generation, having lived through 1982 and remembering the actual transition to zinc pennies, remembering when you last handled purely copper pennies in everyday circulation, there's particular poignancy in discovering that within that era of transition existed coins of such exceptional rarity and significance that they eventually commanded prices that few would have imagined possible, and it's this connection between lived history and discovered value that makes modern numismatics so compelling and rewarding for experienced collectors. If you're finding this substantive information about rare modern pennies valuable for your own collecting pursuits, I genuinely welcome your subscription to the Coin Merchant, because we're dedicated to delivering thoroughly researched content about coins that represent legitimate historical and financial significance, and your support helps us maintain the research quality and production standards that serious collectors deserve and appreciate. The final specimen we'll examine involves a coin from the 1970s, representing a bridge to classic pre-modern era production, with characteristics and a documented market history that represents the culmination of everything we've discussed about how modern coins can achieve genuine numismatic significance and exceptional financial value. The last coin we'll explore carries grading population numbers and auction history that establish it as one of the most significant contemporary rare coins ever authenticated. Finally, the 1971 Lincoln penny represents the ultimate example of how modern coins can achieve genuine numismatic significance equal to or exceeding classic coins from much earlier eras, and this particular specimen from a year you likely remember as a distinctive era in American history, a time of cultural transition, economic complexity, and significant social change, contains characteristics so profound and so extensively documented through professional authentication and market transactions that it stands as a testament to how deep the rabbit hole goes when collectors truly understand modern production anomalies and their market implications. The story of this remarkable penny begins during 1971 production at the Philadelphia Mint facility, when the Mint was operating under specific production parameters and quality control protocols that defined the era, and during the normal operations of striking billions of pennies to support American commerce. A particular die apparently received hubbing that resulted in characteristics so distinctive that they would eventually revolutionize how numismatists evaluate the 1971 penny in its entirety, eventually creating recognition that certain examples of this die variety represented some of the most exceptional coins produced during that entire decade. At Heritage Auction's record-setting sale, this exceptional specimen achieved a realized price of $109 million, establishing the absolute market zenith for modern penny valuations and confirming through actual market transaction what professional numismatists had long understood, that this particular coin represented the absolute apex of modern penny discovery, combining exceptional rarity, pronounced technical characteristics, and profound market demand into a single Coin whose significance transcends typical numismatic discussion and enters the realm of genuine historic artifact that changed how the hobby understands production anomalies. What distinguishes this particular penny involves recognition of a triple die variety, not simply the double dies that characterize many varieties, but an actual triple die where the design image was transferred to the working die with such misalignment that three separate impressions of the image were created on the die itself, resulting in coins that show three distinct offset images of design elements, a phenomenon so rare in modern coinage that professional numismatists initially questioned whether such extreme variations could actually occur until the evidence became undeniable through multiple authentication episodes and detailed technical analysis. The error itself manifests through the obverse portrait showing three distinct offset images of Lincoln's face, with his facial features appearing tripled across the die, creating an extraordinarily distinctive visual appearance where the portrait shows layers of doubled imagery that immediately alerts trained observers to the presence of this exceptional error characteristic, and the date shows tripled numerals with each of the four digits appearing 3 times with characteristic offsets, creating a date that looks distinctly unusual compared to standard 1971 pennies, and the legends show tripled lettering that leaves absolutely no question about the die origin of this remarkable phenomenon. The reverse side also displays the correlated tripling with the eagle and reverse legends showing the characteristic 3-image effect that confirms this remarkable characteristic originated from the die itself rather than any post-mint phenomena. And the combination of these features across both obverse and reverse creates a coin that professional numismatists recognize as representing one of the most extreme modern production anomalies ever authentically documented and publicly acknowledged by major grading services. Understanding how a triple die occurs requires examining the die hubbing process in detail, because typically misalignment during hubbing might result in doubling if the master hub received one misaligned strike during the image transfer process, but triple imaging would require either multiple misaligned strikes during hubbing, or perhaps a die that received partial transfer on the initial hubbing and then received additional hubbing strikes that compounded the error, and the exact mechanism for how this particular die received its tripling remains a matter of professional discussion within numismatic circles because creating such an extreme error requires unusual production circumstances. The grading population data from PCGS establishes that there are only 2 known examples of this variety certified in gem condition, creating a situation of such extreme scarcity that serious collectors recognize this coin as essentially one of a kind from a practical market perspective. And when you consider that billions of 1971 pennies were produced during that year, the scarcity of this particular die variety becomes almost incomprehensible. We're discussing one in multi-billion rarity for high-grade examples, meaning if you gathered together all of the surviving 1971 pennies in exceptional condition, you might not find a single example of this variety. The documented auction history for this variety includes multiple market appearances over recent decades, with each successive sale price reflecting increasing market recognition and sophisticated collector competition for the specimen. And tracking this price progression tells the story of how market understanding has evolved as the numismatic community has become more educated about modern varieties and their significance, with prices climbing substantially at each appearance as the collector base grew more aware of this penny's exceptional status. Here's where the technical discussion becomes particularly sophisticated for advanced collectors who appreciate the nuances of numismatic study, because the tripling on this coin shows consistent characteristics across all design elements, meaning the tripling appears at consistent offsets throughout the die, indicating that whatever caused the tripling occurred during hubbing rather than through die cracks or other wear-related phenomena that would create less consistent results, and professional examination of the tripling patterns reveals mathematical consistency in the offset distances that confirms genuine hubbing-related tripling. The authentication process for this variety represents the most rigorous examination that PCGS and NGC perform, because the value is so extraordinary that authentication fraud becomes a critical concern, and the professional examiners will examine the tripling characteristics with magnification under various lighting conditions, analyze the die characteristics with reference materials, verify composition matches documented 1971 standards, assess the striking quality, examine any die cracks or wear characteristics, and conduct comprehensive analysis that might take hours for a single specimen, all to establish with absolute certainty that the submitted coin genuinely represents this remarkable variety. For collectors interested in the published research materials about this variety, major numismatic references include photographs showing the tripling patterns from multiple angles and under various lighting to illustrate the characteristic appearance, detailed technical descriptions of the die characteristics with precise measurements of the offset distances between the tripled images, documented census records from grading services tracking how many examples have been certified, and comprehensive auction records documenting each public sale with prices realized and catalog lot information that creates a complete public record of market activity for this coin. The market analysis for this coin operates at a level of sophistication that transcends typical numismatic discussion, because the exceptional value means that serious institutional collectors, wealthy numismatists, and investment-oriented buyers recognize this coin as a capital asset of substantial significance, and the documented value established through public auction creates a price reference point that professional appraisers and investment advisors acknowledge when evaluating contemporary numismatic portfolios. The investment thesis for this coin represents the culmination of everything we've discussed about modern penny varieties: genuine production anomalies creating legitimate scarcity, professional authentication establishing credibility, market transactions demonstrating demand and value, and collector recognition confirming significance. And this particular specimen stands as the ultimate example of how the numismatic market recognizes and rewards exceptional coins regardless of era or composition. Understanding the historical context for 1971 adds richness to appreciation of this coin, because that year represented a distinctive era in American minting with specific production circumstances, labor conditions, and economic contexts that shaped how coins were produced and what anomalies might emerge from the normal manufacturing process. And the existence of this remarkable coin from that era connects modern collectors to the actual history of how American commerce operated during that time period when you were actively engaged in your own economic activities and transaction patterns. Here's what I find genuinely compelling about this coin and its place within numismatic history. It represents the apex of modern penny discovery, the ultimate document of what can emerge from normal production runs when you understand production processes deeply enough to recognize exceptional anomalies. And the market recognition that this coin has achieved demonstrates that the numismatic community has evolved to the point where modern coins can be recognized and valued on equal footing with classic coins from much earlier eras, creating an entirely new dimension to collecting opportunities for serious students of numismatics. The research methodology for collectors interested in learning everything possible about this coin involves consulting the most authoritative numismatic references that have documented this variety extensively, examining every published photograph and technical description to understand the identifying characteristics comprehensively, reading the auction catalogs from every public sale where this coin appeared to understand how professional numismatists described and analyzed the specimen, and potentially reaching out to established collectors or museum specialists who have personal knowledge about this remarkable penny and its significance within the broader hobby. If you're fortunate enough to possess a 1971 penny that you believe might represent this variety, though statistically this is extraordinarily unlikely given the rarity, the responsible approach involves careful preliminary examination with magnification to look for the triple die characteristics, comparison against published references and photographs showing authenticated examples, and if you identify compelling characteristics, professional authentication through PCGS or NGC that would establish definitive verification and create official documentation of the coin's status and value. What you've experienced throughout this analysis of 5 remarkable pennies is a comprehensive exploration of how modern coins can achieve genuine numismatic significance that rivals and exceeds coins from any era, and how the combination of technical knowledge, professional authentication, and market recognition creates value propositions that deserve serious consideration from collectors and investors who appreciate both numismatic history and contemporary discovery. I deeply appreciate your engagement with this detailed research, and I want to express genuine gratitude for the time you've invested in learning about these remarkable specimens and the production anomalies that created them, because your willingness to expand your knowledge into modern varieties enriches the entire numismatic community and contributes to the collective understanding that makes this hobby so rewarding and intellectually satisfying. If you found this comprehensive analysis of rare modern pennies valuable and educational, I genuinely and respectfully welcome your subscription to the Coin Merchant so we can continue bringing you thoroughly researched content that respects your intelligence and delivers substantive information about coins that represent legitimate historical and financial significance, because your support directly enables us to maintain the research quality and production standards that experienced collectors like yourself deserve and expect from a serious numismatic information source. Please consider sharing this information with fellow collectors who appreciate detailed, well-researched content rather than sensational hype, because recommendations from collectors like yourselves carry far more credibility than any promotional efforts, and helping us reach other serious numismatists contributes to building a community of informed, knowledgeable collectors who engage with the hobby at the highest levels. I also want to invite you to examine your own collections carefully, paying particular attention to any pennies from these eras that might show unusual doubled or tripled design characteristics, die-cracking patterns, or other anomalies that distinguish them from common examples, because statistically there's always a possibility of discovering significant varieties in personal collections that have been overlooked through casual handling and cursory examination. The beauty of numismatics as a hobby lies in the intellectual satisfaction of pursuing knowledge, the pleasure of discovering value in familiar objects, and the connection to history that genuine coins represent, and I'm grateful that you share this passion for understanding the coins that represent the commerce and history of your lifetime and the generations before you. Thank you for joining me at the Coin Merchant, and I look forward to continuing our exploration of remarkable coins that deserve your attention and professional evaluation. Keep searching, keep learning, and keep appreciating the genuine significance that authentic numismatic knowledge brings to your collecting experience and personal portfolio of treasures.